We have all fought them 100 times. Pale shapes in the dark, clicking, hissing, half animal, half nightmare. But here's the part Skyrim barely says out loud. The Falmer weren't always monsters. They were Snow Elves, a full civilization with faith, architecture and history, until they made one desperate deal. And that deal didn't just blind them. It may have rewritten their bodies, their culture, and maybe even their future. Because some theories suggest the Falmer aren't devolved, they are adapting. And if that's true, then what we're seeing in Skyrim isn't the end of their story, it is the beginning of something much bigger. Hello everyone, and welcome back to yet another video talking about Skyrim lore, theories in Skyrim, and some interesting hypotheses. As you guessed, we're going to have a little look into the lore and many questions surrounding the Falmer. How they were once Snow Elves to become the silent creatures they are that live so deep below. So, as I said, today we are going to deep dive on the Falmer, who they are, where they came from, and how they fell, and the best lore theories that do reframe everything from the Night of Tears to the Dwemer's gift of blindness. And the uncomfortable question, are the Falmer actually victims or the next dominant species beneath Skyrim, waiting patiently for their time to rise above? Before Falmer became a dungeon warning, it meant something else entirely. In the Elder Scrolls lore, Falmer originally refers to the Snow Elves, an ancient elven people native to Skyrim, graceful, devout, and closely tied to the worship of Auri-El. And Skyrim's Dawnguard DLC slams this into the spotlight with Knight Paladin Gelebor, one of the last known living Snow Elves still guarding the chantry of Auri-El in the Forgotten Vale. So the truth is simple and yet brutal. When you fight Falmer in a ruin, you're fighting the descendants of Skyrim's original elves, a people who survived history by crawling into the earth and paying a price that never stopped compounding. To understand the Falmer, you have to start with the breaking point between Snow Elves and the first Nords. The story centers on Saarthal, the earliest major Atmoran settlement in Skyrim, and the massacre, the Night of Tears. The classic telling, the Snow Elves attacked Saarthal and slaughtered nearly everyone, but the motive has always been debated, even within the lore. Some accounts claim the Snow Elves feared the rapid growth of the human settlers, seeing them as a future existential threat. Another major thread suggests something more specific. Saarthal was built over something powerful, and when the Nords unearthed it, the Snow Elves moved to take it. Skyrim practically points at a glowing arrow at what that something was: the Eye of Magnus, a reality-bending artifact buried beneath Saarthal. And whether the Snow Elves attacked out of fear, greed, prophecy, or desperation, the result was the same. Ysgramor escaped, returned with the 500 companions, and the retaliation became a centuries-long purge that shattered Snow Elf power across Skyrim. With the Nords pushing them to extinction, the Snow Elves did what people do when the world is ending. They sought shelter with someone even more dangerous than their enemy, the Dwemer. The Dwemer, Skyrim's vanished deep elves, allowed the Snow Elves to live in their underground cities, but it wasn't mercy, it was a contract. And the price of admission is one of the most horrifying acts in the Elder Scrolls history. Snow Elves were forced to consume a toxic fungus, a substance that slowly took their sight, not just for one generation, but permanently, like a chain around the neck of their entire bloodline. This is why the modern Falmer are blind, but the real horror is what comes next. The fungus wasn't blinding. Over generations, the Snow Elves became something else, physically altered, culturally severed, and effectively remade into the species designed to survive underground and be controlled. Here's where the game quietly undermines its own mindless monster presentation. The Falmer aren't just feral, they're organized. They build camps, they craft weapons and armor, they set traps, they keep churus, not merely alongside them, but almost like a horrifying form of animal husbandry. And if you watch their species, bone charms, totems, arranged remains, it starts to feel less like a random savagery and more like ritual. So even after everything, the Falmer still show the fingerprints of a people, because they have structure, territory, tools, social behavior, which sets up one of the biggest arguments in the lore community. Are the Falmer devolved or evolved into something perfectly suited to the world beneath Skyrim. One popular theory flips the entire framing. The Falmer aren't fallen species. They're a successful one, adapted for darkness, poison, and subterranean warfare. Think about it. Their blindness is paired with heightened senses. They navigate complex terrain, they coordinate attacks, they thrive in environments most surface races can't really endure for long. So maybe the betrayed didn't become lesser, maybe they become specialized. And what looks like degeneration is just the surface world bias talking. Even in Dawnguard, Gelebor implies the fungus story doesn't fully explain the scale of the transformation, and that leads to a darker theory. The Dwemer weren't just blinding the Snow Elves, they were reshaping them. These are possibilities that people argue. The fungus was a delivery mechanism, a slow poison that also altered biology. The Dwemer may have used a selective breeding over generations to create a compliant workforce, or the Falmer's change is a mix of fungus, captivity, and the brutal pressures of living underground for thousands of years. In other words, the price of refuge might not have been blindness. It might have been re-engineering an entire race. At some point, the Falmer rebelled against the Dwemer, and here's the eerie part: the Dwemer are gone, and the Falmer remain. Now, lore-wise, the Dwemer's disappearance is tied to their own grand experiment, so we can't say the Falmer wiped them out, because that would be ridiculous. But the timing invites a chilling interpretation. The Falmer may have been in an open war with their masters, and then suddenly the masters vanished, leaving the slaves alone in a kingdom of machines, ruins, and dark food webs. So in practical terms, the Falmer inherited the underworld. They did not escape, they took over. So let's take a look at another theory and rewind the time and go back to the Night of Tears, because your interpretation here changes everything. If the Snow Elves attacked Saarthal just to wipe out the humans, that's one story. But if the attack was about containing or claiming the Eye of Magnus, the narrative gets a bit murkier. Because just imagine for a sec that you are the Snow Elves. A new population has arrived, they are fast growing, warlike, and they are very unpredictable. Then they dig up something that could reshape reality. So do you negotiate or warn them? Or do you just do the worst thing possible because you believe the alternative is far much worse? Some theories do go even further and suggest that maybe the Snow Elves didn't even fully understand what the Eye was, only that it was dangerous, or maybe they knew exactly what it was, and the Night of Tears was a surgical strike that spiraled into genocide. Either way, it reframes the tragedy. The Falmer might not just be victims of the Dwemer, they could also be victims of a war that started with fear of power buried under the snow. Now here's a really interesting one. Another theory: can the Falmer be cured? This is the theory that everyone asks the moment they meet Gelebor. If a Snow Elf still exists, can the Falmer be restored? The lore gives you just enough hope to hurt. Gelebor calls them the betrayed. Not animals, he speaks like they're still people, and even if he doesn't know how to bring them back, curing them would mean reversing generations of blindness, deep biological adaptation, cultural collapse and replacement, possibly Dwemer-induced changes that were never meant to be undone. So the darker counter theory is, even if you could restore their sight, you might not restore who they were. You might just create a new tragedy, surface dwellers trapped between worlds with no home in either. That could be really bad. So is it more of a restoration, or could it be a second betrayal? So Skyrim, it presents the Falmer like a horror encounter, something that lives under the map, but the deeper you dig, the clearer it does become. They are history that didn't die, a civilization that lost a war, trusted the wrong refuge, but survived anyway, changed, scarred, and still there. And maybe that's the real fear. Not that the Falmer are monsters, but that they are people, and one day the surface might have to recognize them as one. So what I want you to do is ask yourself this: do you think the Falmer are devolved or evolved? And if Skyrim ever gave us a storyline where the Falmer rise as a true faction, would you help them or stop them? And one last question: do you think the Elder Scrolls 6 will give us any lore indication of what happened to the Falmer after Skyrim? So, devolved or evolved? Comment your theory below, and thanks for watching.